Wind screamed against the Cordova cliffs, rain slicing sideways like whips on stone. 6 Navy SEALs crouched deep in a narrow ravine. Mud rose to their knees, ammunition running thin, wounded men groaning in the dark. "Sir, we're not making it out," murmured Specialist Ethan Ward, gripping his mother's necklace with shaking hands. Commander Jack Morgan scanned the terrain, no way back, no support coming. No hope left. He exhaled the truth they already knew. "We've been left to die." Flashlights swept the slope, boots scraping wet rock. Then, from the western ridge, a burst of muzzle fire erupted, cutting through the rain and tearing a path of blood through the night. If that flicker of rescue already chills your spine, hit like and subscribe, because the storm ahead will strike even harder. 6 days earlier, SEAL Team Delta had received orders that changed everything. What began as a simple recon mission along the Cordova border had unraveled into a nightmare of bad intel and forsaken objectives. Now they huddled in a trench that could serve as their grave, forgotten by command and deserted by fortune. Specialist Ethan Ward, barely 21, still dreaming of Iowa's cornfields, checked his rifle for the 100th time. The bolt jammed with mud and rain, proof that technology means little against nature's fury. His mother's silver cross hung heavy on his chest, a relic from a life far removed from this Cordovan hell. Petty Officer Logan Reed pressed his wounded shoulder, blood soaking through field dressings that failed to slow the leak of life. Once the team's best marksman, he now fought to steady his weapon, his perfect aim broken by pain and exhaustion. The irony stung, a sniper who could no longer shoot straight. Staff Sergeant David Kwan counted their last rounds with quiet, deliberate despair. 3 magazines for 6 men, barely enough for one last stand if fortune favored them, or just enough for each to choose his own ending rather than fall into the hands of the cartel trackers closing in through these merciless mountains. Commander Jack Morgan studied the tactical map that had become nothing more than ruined paper in his grip. Red ink bled across objectives that no longer mattered to a unit the world had already erased. Command had written them off after 4 days of silence. Ghost Team Delta, men turned to ghosts before they'd even fallen. Their rations tasted like damp cardboard steeped in despair. The photos tucked in their chest pockets, wives, parents, children, had turned to blurred, waterlogged fragments of lives they might never see again. Ethan Ward kept touching his mother's letter, the paper melting at the edges like their fading hope of rescue. "Command wrote us off," Morgan said flatly, voicing what they all knew. "We're already ghosts." The words carried a weight that went beyond military jargon. They weren't missing in action, they'd been erased from existence, disposable casualties in a war that didn't officially exist. Their families would receive sterile letters about classified operations and unavoidable losses. Logan Reed squinted through the rain toward the opposite ridge. A flicker of light, too precise to be lightning, too steady to come from enemy gear. He blinked away the mix of rain and blood clouding his sight, wondering if the loss was twisting his senses. "You see that?" he whispered to David Kwan, pointing toward the western slope. Kwan followed his line of sight but saw only blackness and storm. "See what?" Reed shook his head, unable to explain the crawling sense that unseen eyes were fixed on them, not with malice, but with intent. Someone was out there. As the night deepened, that feeling refused to fade. Somewhere above, Reed could swear there was a presence watching over them, one that didn't belong to their hunters. But exhaustion and blood loss made him question his own instincts. Ethan wiped mud from his rifle again, knowing the effort was hopeless. The weapon that once made Ethan lethal in training had become nothing more than a club in this storm. He thought of his mother's soft voice reading stories about endless Iowa summers, about the simple joys he'd never appreciated enough. Commander Morgan glanced at his watch, a pointless reflex now. Time meant nothing when every passing hour might be your last. The ticking hands marked not survival, but the slow approach of enemies who knew these mountains far better than they ever would. Yet Logan Reed still felt something on the ridge above, not danger, but potential. Not death drawing near, but perhaps salvation waiting unseen in the dark. The storm grew fiercer, amplifying their sense of isolation from a world that had already forgotten their names. Dawn brought no mercy, only clear sight for the hunters tightening their snare. Mortar shells rained down with deadly rhythm, each blast creeping closer to the seals' position. The enemy had found them, and escape routes once imagined in the dark now revealed themselves as kill zones crafted with intent. Ethan pressed into the muddy wall, feeling each detonation vibrate through the stone. Shards of rock and metal whistled past, cutting into faces already shredded by debris. His rifle clicked dry, the final rounds wasted on unseen shapes in the storm. Contact left. David Kwan shouted, spotting muzzle flashes from coordinates that shouldn't have existed on their maps. The enemy had them surrounded with precision far too calculated for simple rebels. These were professionals, trained killers. Reed tried to lay down suppressive fire, but his wounded shoulder betrayed him. Every shot went wide, squandering ammunition and precious seconds. Each missed round was another inch closer to the end. Distorted voices echoed from hidden speakers, mocking, cruel. Americans. Your flag won't save you here. You die like dogs in our mountains. Morgan fought to raise command on the radio, but only static replied, a hiss of white noise like a death shroud. Either their comms had finally failed, or command had truly abandoned them to the peaks. Panic cracked through Ethan's voice. Sir, we can't hold this position. We don't have enough ammo for another fight. Then Kwan's rifle jammed, the worst possible moment. He worked desperately to clear it as bullets ripped through mud and rain. The mire that had haunted them for days finally claimed their weapons, turning tools of precision into worthless steel. Reed spotted movement from several angles at once. They were being flanked on three sides. The tactics were too sharp, too disciplined. Whoever surrounded them knew exactly how to erase a trapped special operations team. This wasn't a random skirmish. It was an execution carried out with cold precision. Make every round count, Commander Morgan ordered, though they all knew the math. 6 men, barely any ammo, outnumbered and cornered on terrain chosen by their enemies. The result was already written. Ethan clenched his mother's necklace, whispering childhood prayers that felt foreign amid the chaos. The silver cross bit into his palm, a painful reminder of love and safety in a world that had none left. Mortar rounds crept closer with each blast, the enemy gunners locking in range and methodically tearing apart any scrap of cover they could use. Soon they'd be fully exposed, sitting targets for shooters they couldn't reach. Reed's vision swam from blood loss and fatigue. The marksman who once fired with surgical accuracy could barely see his own hands, let alone steady a scope. His gift for long-range precision meant nothing here. David Kwan checked their last magazines and found 3 ruined by mud, cutting their odds even further. The numbers didn't lie, they couldn't win a drawn-out fight against forces this large and trained. Commander Morgan made the hardest call of his life. Hold your fire. Let them come. It wasn't a strategy, it was surrender to reality. They'd die in this ravine, but they'd die as soldiers, not as prey. If they were going down, they'd make it costly. Ethan closed his eyes, hearing his mother's voice in lullabies as shells screamed overhead, the sounds of Iowa spring fields mixing strangely with explosions and shrapnel. The enemy voices drew nearer, mocking and confident. They knew the SEALs were bleeding out, boxed in with nowhere to escape. The kill was just a matter of time. Yet even through fading sight and pounding pain, Reed couldn't shake the sense that something was watching from the ridge, something that didn't belong to the chaos below. It wasn't an enemy spotter marking targets. It was different, unknown. Lightning flared, painting the mountains white for an instant, and in that flash, Reed caught movement on the western slope, something that defied the logic of their situation. Then a single, perfect shot cracked the air. One of the enemy gunners collapsed before any SEAL had even pulled a trigger. The bullet seemed to come from nowhere, a single, flawless round that sliced through roaring wind and pounding rain to strike its mark with surgical precision. The enemy soldier collapsed soundlessly, his rifle clattering against the rock as life left him in an instant. Ethan stared in disbelief. None of them had fired, yet death had reached their pursuers with an efficiency that eclipsed anything he'd ever witnessed in training. 3 seconds later, another crack echoed. A second hostile went down, one who'd been hidden behind solid cover no SEAL could have possibly hit from their position. Whoever was shooting had angles and visibility that defied logic. Each round landed like clockwork, single shots, perfectly placed, no wasted ammunition, no corrections, just clean, deliberate kills executed by someone who'd turned precision into an art form born of long, brutal experience. Reed squinted through a haze of blood and rain toward the western ridge, trying to glimpse their unseen ally. Muzzle flashes flared faintly in the storm, but the shooter remained hidden behind natural cover thick enough to conceal an entire platoon. Contact! Contact! Enemy voices screamed in Spanish, their tone cracking with panic that replaced the arrogance of minutes before. They were taking losses from a ghost they couldn't see, couldn't reach. Quan watched wide-eyed as an enemy mortar crew was erased in a blur of perfect timing, the gunner, the loader, the spotter, each dropped with methodical precision by someone who understood small unit tactics better than most instructors. The mysterious shooter picked off key roles with surgical awareness, radio men first, cutting communications, then squad leaders, breaking command, then heavy gunners, stripping away the enemy's firepower. Ethan began tracking the tempo, roughly 8 seconds per shot, just enough for breathing, aim, and trigger squeeze. Whoever this was maintained consistency and calm through a storm that would cripple most marksmen. Commander Morgan recognized the pattern forming in the chaos. This wasn't luck or coincidence, it was systematic extermination, carried out by a veteran with years of combat and mastery of the rifle. El Tirator Fantasma, someone shouted through the rain. The ghost shooter. Fear swept through their ranks as unseen death shredded their formation, turning soldiers into terrified survivors scrambling for cover they knew wouldn't save them. Reed searched desperately for the source, but the savior remained invisible, a phantom working in silence while the enemy disintegrated. Their commander tried to shout orders, only for his voice to cut off mid-word, another perfect shot. Leadership gone, comms destroyed, heavy weapons silenced, the battle flipped in moments. Quan noticed the shooter's uncanny discipline, every round was perfectly matched to its purpose. No stray shots, no ricochets, just flawless ballistics. Whoever this was understood bullets the way others understood breathing. For the first time in days, Ethan let himself feel something close to hope. Death, which had seemed inevitable, now retreated under the hand of a protector who dismantled the enemy with skill beyond anything the SEALs could have mustered alone. Commander Morgan began to notice a rhythm in the gunfire, something hauntingly familiar. It stirred buried memories of classified briefings and whispered tales from old operators about marksmen whose feats bordered on legend. The enemy's retreat accelerated as the survivors realized they were up against a force they couldn't match. Seasoned soldiers recognized when they'd met their superior, and instinct soon outweighed orders, survival trumping pride as death struck with mechanical precision. Reed's blurred vision cleared just enough to spot movement on the ridge, a lone figure shifting positions with flawless tactical awareness, maintaining cover while keeping a perfect field of fire. This wasn't luck. It was the muscle memory of years spent in real combat. The last of the enemy broke and ran, their confident assault collapsing into panicked flight in minutes. A carefully orchestrated attack destroyed by a single shooter they hadn't even detected. Silence followed, only the rain tapping stone and the faint hum of retreating engines breaking it. The SEALs stood stunned, awed by the brutal efficiency of their mysterious savior. Commander Morgan scanned the ridge, searching for any sign of who had delivered such precise destruction. Whoever they were, their marksmanship belonged to a class of shooter found only in elite circles, yet no friendly units were anywhere near these mountains. Who the hell was that? Ethan whispered, echoing what they all wondered. There would be no answers yet. Their unseen guardian had given them something greater than explanation, life itself. As they climbed out of the ravine, a figure emerged through the fading rain, drifting from the ridge like smoke taking shape. Through the mist, they saw a woman, perhaps 40, dressed in battered civilian gear worn thin by years of exposure. Her weathered jacket bore stains from long nights and hard living. A faded baseball cap shaded eyes that had seen too much death and too little peace. In her hands rested an M40A5 sniper rifle, modified, immaculate, reverently maintained. The weapon gleamed like a relic, its scope worth more than some soldiers' salaries. Ethan froze, disbelief written on his face. She looked like any local wanderer, but Morgan saw the truth immediately, the way she crossed uneven ground without shifting loose stones, her constant scanning of vantage points, every motion disciplined and deliberate. Then he noticed the faint tattoo under her sleeve, an aged USMC eagle, globe, and anchor, barely visible but unmistakable to a veteran's eye. Marine, Morgan said with quiet certainty, the weight of 2 decades in uniform behind his words. She didn't confirm, didn't deny. Instead, she studied each man, measuring wounds, awareness, strength, and chances of survival, like a field officer evaluating a unit under fire. Reed tried to thank her, but language failed. How do you thank someone who saved your life with godlike precision? Her reply was short, her voice firm with the authority of a leader used to command. You've got 6 minutes before reinforcements hit this valley. David glanced at his watch, stunned by her exact timing. How could she possibly know? The question alone hinted she operated on an entirely different level. Her awareness hinted at intelligence gathering far beyond casual observation. This woman clearly had access to information no civilian could gather alone. Ethan wanted to ask her 100 questions, but training and instinct overruled curiosity. When someone just saved your life, you don't question their orders, you move. She guided them through mountain paths invisible on any map, weaving between ravines and ridges that bypassed enemy patrols and hid them even from the sky. Her steps carried the certainty of someone who had walked these trails for years, memorized every line of terrain, every shadow. Commander Morgan noticed she carried nothing extra, just her rifle, ammo, and the bare essentials. No comfort gear, no wasted weight. She moved like someone who'd learned that survival meant stripping life down to the tools of violence and endurance. Her fieldcraft was beyond anything their elite training had offered. She anticipated threats before they formed, spotted cover they never noticed, and kept situational awareness sharp enough to humble SEAL instructors. Reed lagged behind, his wounds slowing him, but she subtly adjusted their pace and route, no complaint, no irritation, only the silent professionalism of someone who'd tended wounded comrades before. During a brief pause, Quan finally asked, "Who are you?" She scanned the horizon through a pair of binoculars worth more than most people's cars before answering, her voice quiet but edged with experience. "Someone who was once in your place," she said. "Someone who didn't get help when it mattered." The words explained nothing yet revealed everything. She was a survivor, someone left behind by her own, who'd known the sting of abandonment while others wrote polished reports calling it an acceptable loss. Ethan understood they owed their lives to someone who would never be honored for it, no medals, no recognition, no mention in any report. A ghost warrior who operated in the shadows where governments denied involvement and heroes went unseen. Ahead, the clearing for extraction opened through the mist, the distant thrum of rotor blades promising safety, and the end of her story with them. Morgan wanted to ask questions, to understand how a woman with no insignia could wield skills that outmatched elite forces, but before he could speak, she was already gone, fading into the mountains like mist retreating from sunlight. They boarded the helicopter alive, carrying memories that would never make it into any official account. 2 weeks after extraction, whispers started circulating through SEAL training halls and briefing rooms. The reports mentioned external fire support of unidentified origin, but the men who lived it told another version, quietly, behind closed doors. Specialist Ethan Ward, recovering in a stateside hospital, described impossible shots to soldiers who'd seen plenty of combat but never miracles. His story sounded like fantasy, except for one fact: they'd survived an ambush no one could have. Petty Officer Logan Reed, his shoulder slowly healing, drew maps of firing angles that should have been impossible given the terrain. Instructors examined his sketches with puzzled respect, recognizing skill that exceeded their own grasp of ballistics. Staff Sergeant David Kwan dove into military archives, searching for records of female snipers capable of such feats. The deeper he looked, the murkier it became: classified programs, experimental units, shadow projects that officially never existed. Commander Jack Morgan filed a routine report but stayed silent about the truth. Privately, though, he wrestled with the same questions that haunted them all. How did a civilian possess military-grade training and equipment that surpassed their own? Who was she, and why had she been there at that exact moment when everything hung in the balance? The story spread quietly through the ranks, across bases and branches, taking on the tone of a legend. Veterans shared fragments about phantom shooters who appeared when hope was gone, delivering impossible salvation before vanishing into silence. From Coronado to Fort Bragg, instructors whispered her story. Some called her Raven, others Angel, or simply the Phantom. The names changed, but the myth stayed the same: a woman who appeared when soldiers faced certain death. Intelligence analysts tried connecting the Cordova incident to similar field reports, but every trail led to sealed files buried deep under clearance walls. Some mysteries, it seemed, were protected on purpose. Ethan's mother noticed something different when she visited him: how he held her cross now, not as a charm, but as a reminder that faith could wear human form. Reed returned to the range with sharper instincts than ever, his accuracy inexplicably improved, as though witnessing mastery had transformed him. Instructors couldn't explain his precision. Kwan began exploring the civilian shooting world, uncovering circles of expert marksmen whose skills rivaled military elites, people who operated without uniforms yet carried themselves like warriors. Meanwhile, Morgan received quiet messages from old colleagues, others who'd seen the same pattern, the same unseen hand intervening in missions that should have failed. Stories of mysterious shooters, ghosts in the crosshairs, whose existence couldn't be proven, yet whose impact no one could deny. The legend spread on its own, thriving without approval or denial. In distant corners of the world where special operations ran missions that never happened, veterans quietly warned new recruits: sometimes, help comes from sources you'll never understand. Meanwhile, far from any battlefield, in a quiet border town where strangers came and went without question, a woman sat in a worn-out cafe that offered bad coffee but perfect anonymity. She cleaned her rifle with ritual care, eyes flicking over a newspaper printing the polished, half-true version of events she had lived herself. No one paid her any mind. Locals here knew that curiosity could get you killed, and that some people preferred to remain unseen. To most, she looked like a faded expatriate hiding from a past life. But the rifle case beside her chair told another story to anyone who knew the language of steel and precision. That weapon wasn't a collector's piece, it was a tool of mastery, maintained with devotion that only professionals understand. One shot from it could alter a battlefield, rewrite an ending, save lives no one would ever know were in danger. Fire from the Ridge had become more than a legend, it was now a symbol of hope for soldiers left behind, proof that rescue could come from the unseen. The Cordova Mountains had taught sick SEALs that salvation doesn't always arrive from command, it can appear from the shadows, silent and unexpected. The woman they never truly met, whose name remained unspoken and past classified, had shown them that real warriors often live outside the lines of recognition. Her story is a reminder that heroism doesn't need medals or uniforms, it can take the form of a lone guardian waiting on a ridge, watching for the moment to act. Strength doesn't always look like command authority, and protection doesn't always come from sanctioned sources. Sometimes, it wears a simple jacket and carries a weapon tuned to perfection. Real guardians live unseen, defending the illusion that nations never need ghosts to fight their wars. The fire that cut through Cordova's darkness still burns, anywhere American soldiers face impossible odds against enemies who mistake silence for weakness. True legends don't chase glory. They emerge when the world needs them, then vanish again, leaving only whispers and belief. And if stories like hers deserve to be remembered, hit like and subscribe to Major Tom's Tales, because somewhere out there, another hidden protector may already be watching from the ridge.